Can you hear me?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's begin. We can start recording, I guess, if that's what we're going to do. Hello, everyone. I'm Devtooligan. Welcome to your first week on the block. I am a resident emeritus with yAcademy. I went through block 3, and I was a resident. I did some auditing with yAudit, what is now called yAudit. And I also used to work for a protocol yield, it's a lending protocol. And recently I started as a security engineer at Trail of Bits. So the topic of this presentation is things I wish I knew before starting yAcademy. You know, I think from what I understand of most of you, you all have, many of you have experience, whether it's through Code4Arena or through other auditing firms or Immunify. And so I didn't have any of that. Like the yAcademy was really my first introduction to auditing. I kind of got through the interviews just through some strong Solidity skills. And I had a lot of, knowledge about like writing secure code, but I didn't really know anything about auditing. So, obviously my experience will be different than yours based on your experience, but I still think that, there's some interesting things to talk about and share that I kind of wish I knew before I started. And also feel free to just chime in anytime. Like I'll periodically ask for questions, but we can just make this more interactive too. If you have any question, please just go ahead. So one little thing is, so first let's talk about what is yAcademy. You probably know that we do these fellowships kind of with the goal of trying to address the shortage of software auditing talent in the world. And then we also produce research and public goods. There's this common Web3 security issues that is actually quite useful, I think, even when conducting audits. And there's also some proxy research that we did. Engineer and I put a lot of work into that one. And then there's the repo. So there's this is kind of like the yAcademy branch, and then this is a recent change, but now like yAudit handles all the kind of the year-round regular auditing. So this is basically, this is what yAcademy kind of is all about. And so, I didn't really know when I started about kind of the research, and that's been one of the kind of enjoyable parts of yAcademy for me. So one little thing, just I don't know if you guys have kind of heard this, but there's like this ongoing debate about the term audit. Like many people don't like it. They like, well, let me ask you guys, can anyone think of a reason why, or have you heard about this? Like, what are some reasons why that people don't like using the word audit?
I think some folks assume it's like a stamp of approval.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of has like some kind of implicit guarantees. It might cause, people to assume it's something that it isn't. And so I guess, a lot of people prefer the term security review, but I don't know. I use the term audit all the time. I don't really think it's that big of a deal, but I remember that was one of the first things that I learned once I kind of joined yAcademy. So today we're going to talk a little bit about like the security review process. Um, this is going to be, fairly opinionated, and everyone has a different style. I think like the theme of this presentation is going to be, to encourage you all to really maximize the opportunities from this fellowship. And so like you could just kind of cruise through this fellowship based on kind of maybe stuff you already know and some experience you already have, or you could push yourself into learning new things and really growing. So I would really encourage you to take that second attitude, and we're going to talk about that. And yeah, so let's just kind of dive in. And so when I say security review, I mean there's really like a few different ways that this covers a few different things. So like one is like a traditional audit where the client will typically be looking for not only security vulnerabilities, but they also want some best practices and maybe sometimes gas optimizations, and they're expecting kind of a full written up report. All right, so there's kind of like a full audit, and then there's like maybe you could think of it in context of like a code for arena contest, right? Where there is a write up, but they're just on the individual findings, and it's more. It is similar to an audit, but like if you're kind of like optimizing for profit, you might approach it differently than if you were doing a standard audit. You may like skip some of the lower. You might not spend as much time on some of the lower priority stuff so that you could look for more highs and crits to make more money. And then there's like Immunify is similar. Immunify bounty hunting is similar. It's just that you obviously don't have that time structure. So there's different approaches you can use a security review for, but I mean the heart of all of these things is these three steps really. It's understanding what the code does, and then like what I call the fun part we're going to talk about, which is where you're trying to basically hack the code, and then the final is the write-up, which is going to vary depending on the context. So those are the big picture items. So yeah, like there's a lot of ways that you can dive into understanding the code, and like my methodology has also been kind of evolving as well. So I wrote this like 6 months ago, and I just added to it a little. So I'll point out what's kind of changed. So first of all, just like everyone has to understand that like if you don't already know this, that it takes time to learn a new code base. Like I think it was Christophe Michel who was talking when I was a fellow, and he said something like, you know, oh, somebody said, oh, I was checking out that code and I couldn't find any vulnerabilities. And then Christoph said, well, how long did you look at it? And they're like, oh, I looked at it for 5 hours. And Christoph was like, well, that's not, nearly enough, and I totally agree. I know that some people can spend less, especially in a contest situation. I could see that, but um, like if you think about it, there's really like kind of two approaches to getting to the same place. Okay, so like the approach that I use, it works well with auditing, which is kind of like uh, uh, a very kind of um, wide focus, whereas like on all the aspects, which will also catch these best practice things and these like lower and informational issues. But there's this other approach. So I think you might have heard of it referred to as like the Sam CZ Sun approach. And that's where you really are just trying to find, you're just basically trying to go straight to the vulnerability. Like you don't care what all these like view functions do and how the NAT spec is on, some of the getter functions. What you are really going after is like, how can this protocol be, wrecked? And for like, I would say like for an intermediate person, those two approaches can be very different, because one person is kind of like going line by line through all the code, where somebody else is kind of like maybe looking at some of the more vulnerable functions first. But as you do more and more auditing, those two kind of approaches are going to end up converging. So really the question really is of like, how do you want to get there? And for me, I do a lot of auditing. I'm a I'm paid to do audits, so I take kind of the more holistic approach of understanding the entire code base, and that's where this is coming from. But we should acknowledge that there's another approach that you could take that isn't as comprehensive, but either path that you take is going to end up in the same place. And so the real experts, the Christophe Michels of the world, he's done, I think, over 200 audits. So he recognizes patterns so quickly. And that is really kind of like the goal in my mind of where you want to get to in terms of not only auditing, but also contests, bounty hunting, whatever. So this is my approach with all that kind of background in mind. Is I'm putting at least 15 to 25 hours just to understand it, and just to understand like the protocol, what it's doing. One of the things that I've started doing recently is running Slither early on. And I used to find that it just was kind of a little bit annoying, and it provided so many false positives. I didn't really think it was worth it. But now that I'm more comfortable with Slither, I find it valuable in a couple of ways. For one, it has this thing called Slither printers, which allows me to kind of slice and dice the contracts and look at them in different ways that I would normally do manually. So like you could say, oh, show me all the external functions that don't have a only owner modifier or something like that. There's a lot of different things you could do with the printers. So I really like the printers. And also, actually, I find that triaging the initial Slither results is actually a nice little introduction to the code base, because one thing to keep in mind when you're triaging Slither results, you're not necessarily looking for like really complex involved issues. So for like reentrancy, you're not looking at multifunction reentrancy. You're just looking for very simple reentrancy. And if you think, for example, if it gets flagged for reentrancy, what I would do is, if I think there's a chance that it might also could work in somehow with some kind of cross-functional reentrancy, I would like flag it and come back later when I know more about the protocol. But what I'm really trying to just get through while I'm triaging the Slither results is all just the slam dunks, like all the very obvious things that are just kind of contained within that function. And if it needs something more involving more context of the protocol, then I'll mark it. And then also, of course, you're going to run into a number of false positives along the way. So yeah, I pretty much Slither is part of my process now. And I just started getting into writing some custom detectors and stuff too. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of value in doing this. Like, to be honest with you guys, like when I first started, I was so curious, like, oh, is there an automated way to do a lot of the things we do? And can we utilize like maybe some kind of like checklist that we could like check off what we're doing? And then as I kind of, like advanced along the midwit curve, like when I was prime midwit, I was like, no, you can't do any of that. You need a human to look into these issues and checklist. No way, you can't replace a human with a checklist. But now I'm kind of back to like, actually, I think that there's a lot of things that can be done with static analysis, and also I'm using checklists a lot more, and we'll talk about some of that as well. So yeah, like I said, my kind of perspectives are changing, and it's also changing with the technology as well. So just moving on the understand the code part. There's this like well, first of all, I do read all the documents, and I read all the comments, and I also read like the external documentation. But there's like a little bit of debate about that. Like some people say you shouldn't look at any comments or any documentation. You should just like look at the code. Like, does anyone has anyone heard about that, or does anyone have any idea why people might say that?
I think that reading, especially nat spec and comments, introduces like the developer's biases into your own opinion. So
Yep, that's the reason. That is exactly why. And that is also true. And that is a valid criticism. However, I think that based on the fact that these audits are time constrained, okay, we can't just go on an audit for the rest of our life and understand every every single aspect of the compiled bytecode. We only have a couple weeks or however long the audit is. So the benefit you gain in being able to ramp up quickly, I think greatly offsets the risk of kind of succumbing to this developer bias. And I think being aware of that, you can kind of compensate a little bit for that bias. I think being aware of it is super helpful. So me, I'm a big fan of reading the docs. It's evolving too, though. I'll tell you, like if it's a super huge protocol that has many different aspects to it, I might start my focus in like one area and not read all the documentation for all the different, kind of domains of the protocol at first. I may just limit my review and my initial, my first step to like kind of maybe one part. It really depends kind of on the size and on my comfort level. And so on this list here, it says deep dive, depth first search. That I've kind of been changing it up here with E and F. I've been doing F earlier now. So like once right now, my goal is to get to being able to understand how the common workflows work kind of in my head, like from a code perspective. And so I've been kind of getting to the test. Hopefully hopefully you get some tests. Hopefully you get some good tests. If you don't, well, then never mind. But assuming you have some decent tests, like I just find it so valuable to walk through the tests. In some cases, maybe even write my own tests. And really looking at the setup of the test. It's like if you are testing an AMM, well, what is involved in like deploying that AMM? What's like what needs to be set on the AMM before you could start trading? And then once you've kind of got it set up correctly, what is involved in, I don't know, swapping, token X for token Y. So like, I used to kind of just really just go line by line through the code after I kind of looked at the documentation, but now I've been going to the tests first so that I can kind of more quickly develop these like mental models of what's going on. So that's something that's changed in my approach since I wrote this. And so as you're going through, right, like, as for me, I'm usually not completely investigating the issue, okay? Like I think it was an engineer that used to call them threads to pull on. Like I'm just finding these little like leads, or like threads to pull on, or potential vulnerabilities, or things that I just want to come back to or explore, and I'm making note of them. I used to use this tool called, I think, Visual Developer. The one thing I don't like about that is like you have to leave audit tags in the code, and sometimes you end up like inserting a line, which then now your code doesn't match up. But anyway, the point is keep this list going. Like one of the things I found is like if I identify a potential issue, if, for example, I were to really dive into that, it might end up being a waste of time that had I just moved along and just kind of made a note of it, like maybe something else I learn about later, as I'm going through the protocol will answer that question. So I found that generally I will go down the rabbit hole for the potential issues. I just kind of note them. So this keeping this list is important to me. And yeah, really just avoid, I don't even really think about low informational or gas optimizations, to be honest. Like maybe if there's one that really bugs me or it's super obvious, I might just make a note of it. But like I'm just trying to, at this point, understand The protocol is my primary objective, but I'm also trying to just note any potential larger issues like, high or critical. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. And then maybe I might come across a low or come across a medium. I'll note that as well. But I'm really just coming at this with the goal of learning and understanding the code, and then also creating this list of threads to pull on. Yeah, and so after doing all of this, going through the code, you want to get to a point where you can basically, in your head, you can think through the steps in some of the major workflows of the code. So if it's I keep using AMM, I do a lot of stuff with AMMs. If it's an AMM, you could kind of think through the basic steps of what happens when you swap token X for Y. You know how they handle it. You know how the reserves get updated. So that's kind of the level of comfort I strive for. And I don't always get there, but sometimes I get there also really early. It just kind of really depends on the code base and the complexity and the novelty of it. And yeah, the last point, I love it when I dream about the code, because that tells me I've made it. Yeah. Once you could get to that point where you've really wrapped your head around the code, to me, that's when the fun starts, because now you can start getting creative and trying different things. But yeah, and this first big step of understanding the code, that's also hardest for new people, because the more you do this, the quicker you get at recognizing patterns, and you've already developed certain mental models that you can now apply to new code that you read. So this is the hardest step for new people, and it really gets easier over time. And we're going to also talk about ways to optimize this as well. Yeah. So I know I talked a lot, and I said I want this interactive. Does anyone have any questions or kind of comments? Does it make sense about first you want to kind of get in there and understand everything?
I guess I want to ask if you see any value to creating diagrams if they're not provided by the sponsor or by the project, right? So class diagrams, sequence diagrams, use case diagrams, just to get a better mental view of the protocol and of the code in its entirety.
100%. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I had intended to talk about that and I just forgot. So one of the things I've been doing, especially lately, is, remember how I said I've been switching it up a little lately, and instead of just kind of manually line by line going through every single line of every single contract, I'm now getting to the test quicker and kind of getting interactive quicker. And actually my goal is to create some kind of diagram that helps me understand the process and that I can share with my teammates. So yeah, I think the diagrams, creating your own diagram is just so helpful, because it just, it takes a certain level of understanding to be able to kind of create these visualizations. And then, with the goal of explaining it to your colleagues, it really kind of, it really cements the understanding. And what I found since kind of pushing for this, and we're going to talk about team synergy and stuff later, but what I found is that the whole team gets ramped up a lot quicker if you kind of have these early meetings where you're sharing knowledge. One guy, makes a diagram explaining the, I don't know, the pool deployment process, and it's going to not only help him become an expert on it, but it's going to help out the whole team. And so, yeah, I think that's a great call. Thank you for bringing that up. Diagrams are huge. And you know what? Also, even the client loves to get the diagrams at the end. That's when they really like to get the diagrams. Yeah, great question, great comment. Anything else? Anyone else before we move on?
Yes. Yes. Does this process change depending on the size of the code base? Let's say you
Absolutely.
have,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like recently I did a very short 500 lock one, and it was like supposed to be 1 week, but like by Tuesday, like I, I already had kind of like memorized the whole code basically. So, I mean, the overall steps are still kind of the same, but like the process could vary greatly. And you know how I said like I don't always like immediately write up like an issue that I find or investigate it. Sometimes I do, especially if I'm very sure that it's a it's a problem. I'll kind of write it up earlier. Like I was on an audit with Christoph Michel before, and a couple of times, and yeah, I noticed that he writes things up as soon as he finds them. But he also, as I mentioned, he's got like, a lot of practice and has a lot of kind of like knowledge and patterns built up in his head. So he sees those things a lot quicker than most of us do. All right, anything else? We can move on to the fun part. So remember in this part, we're kind of like basically understanding the code, and we're creating this list of threads to pull on. And so now you've got your list, right? You've got like a list that probably looks something like, there might be a data validation issue in this one function, and looks like we could have a problem with reentrancy in this other function, and you've just got like a bunch of notes there. And so, yeah, you basically triage your notes. I like to start with the more fun ones. You're going to be writing a lot of POCs, and that's another benefit to getting in the client's tests early, is that now once you've kind of like uh, you know, now once you can like replicate their tests and you understand what their tests are doing, it becomes a lot easier to write a POC, because 9 times out of 10, your POC is just going to be one of their tests that you've modified. And yeah, there's this, I mean, Chisel is great. I think that was mentioned earlier, and uh, Remix. And then also there's this one thing, I'm going to send these slides out later, but Morellian has this thing called Solidity Sandbox, and so I can just show you guys. I just type Scratch, and then we'll call it yAcademy for fun, and it automatically switches to this directory, and it loads up a test ready for me to just like test. Like I'll use this all the time for like little short things I just want to test. Maybe I want to confirm a gas optimization, or just anytime I just want to quickly test something out in Solidity. I use this Scratch Solidity Sandbox thing. So those are some of the tools I use. Yeah, I mean, you, as you're going through this, you want to question, all the assumptions. You want to try to be creative. And yeah, there's definitely some dopamine hits to kind of writing up your POC and like watching like the attackers, watching the protocols ETH go down and your attackers ETH go up is kind of a thrill. Let's move on. Okay, so we've kind of spent some time understanding the code. We've come up with our list of threads to pull on. We've gone through our original list, okay? And then also, as you're going through your list, you're always adding to this list, right? So like as you're looking at one thing, you might think of something else. So you're constantly updating this list. What happens when you've exhausted this list and you can't think of anything more to do? That's where we're at now, okay? You've completely, and I'll tell you guys this, there are definitely times where I don't even get that far on an audit. I'm still like on my, working on my threads to pull on list, and I have to kind of prioritize it because the audit's ending soon. So there's examples of that, but there's also times where, okay, I've gone through everything, I've written up, I found all the issues I think I could find. What do you do now? And so this is where I think that some checklists can really help. You have your just kind of your common categories, for example, reentrancy, flash loan, proxies. Did you get, I'm sure you guys did some fun quizzes this week. Is that this week? Anyone? Is that can anyone
Yeah.
respond? It's this
Yeah,
week,
this
right?
week.
Cool. Well, I didn't see what the quiz problems were, but typically there'll be at least one or more that where it's all about kind of like a data validation of the parameters, and I think like that is like the #1 root cause of most hacks. There's several things I've linked here that can be used to kind of generate your list of common vulnerabilities. yAcademy one we clicked on before, SWC registry. I don't think that's really maintained much anymore. Hacks by root cause, that's a fairly recent one, and that one is kind of interesting. And there's this article by one of our current residents, Jackson. I think that's got some good info in it. So anyway, you get this list of potential issues, right? And then there's two ways there's two things you could do with it. One is you can just go through function by function, and especially the more critical functions, and you could, for each function, you could go down your checklist, right? You could say, okay, does this have reentrancy? No. Does this have any kind of flash loan only? No. You can just go down the list per function, and then once you've kind of checked off everything, you can move on to your next function. And another way to do this is once you've maybe done that, or maybe you could start with this other way, will be to go down the list of vulnerabilities and think carefully about what you know about the code and try to think of it, where might there be a reentrancy? Where might there be a flash loan attack? Where might there be, so instead of going through each function, you're kind of thinking through each vulnerability type and whatchamacallit, and then considering the entire code base. And that's also how you're going to catch the more involved vulnerabilities often, especially like the cross-functional stuff. And then here are some, when we talk about riskiest parts of the code, you guys probably already know this, like external functions, external calls, any kind of state modifying logic. And then other ideas to kind of add to your list. This whole slide is just about adding to your list. Is you could do a deeper dive on the code. You can go back, do more line by line manual review. And then one of the things I've been kind of getting into lately, and I think that we're seeing a lot more of this, like fuzzing and kind of invariant testing is becoming much more commonplace in Web3 anyway. And so, yeah, this is another tool that we use to kind of, find potential vulnerabilities. So kind of in a nutshell, you get your initial list that you kind of created in step 1, you go through that thing, and then you find once you've gone through it, you find new things to add to your list and kind of just keep repeating this. And yeah, I haven't really ever gotten to a point where I didn't have anything to do on an audit. It's like every kind of cycle, kind of the deeper you get, the more ideas you get. So that's kind of in a nutshell how the first 2 steps work in my head. Anyone have any question on that? Okay, cool. And then the last part is just the write-up. Okay, I don't think there's really much to say about this. You guys, I'm sure all know how to write, and I think nowadays ChatGPT can be very helpful with your write-ups. Be sure that you don't use something like public GPT if it's sensitive client data. But for example, like a Code for Arena contest or something more public, or if the information you're using it for is more public, then yeah, I think it could be very helpful for the write-ups. But yeah, I don't have much more to say about writing things up, just that over time it'll get easier to do. All right, so we went through the 3 major parts of a security review. And yeah, so just look at these numbers like this, and this is just totally made up, but this is like my perspective, is beginners spend so much time understanding the code, whereas like, somebody who's done, 200 audits is going to come in and be able to understand things a lot quicker. So, you know, at the beginning, you're going to just be spending a lot more time understanding the code. And then as you develop that skill, that muscle, and those pattern recognitions, those patterns to recognize, you're going to slowly be able to spend more and more time in the second part. And we're going to also talk for a minute about how can we optimize for the fun part. So as I've said a few times, just doing lots of audits, okay? That's like the best way. You got to just exercise that muscle, and you have to, you know, venture into the unknown. And it just, I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I've felt so like, and I'll see a new code base and I'll say, oh my gosh, this is so daunting. You know, it just seems so complex. I got to read this 30-page white paper and they're trying to invent some new math. And then by the end of the, you know, time period, it's just, it's kind of, it's a nice feeling to have, to then have developed a deeper understanding of it. And so every time you do that, every time you go from like, oh my God, this is so fucking complex, I don't understand it, to, okay, I know what's going on here. Every time you do that, that's like a rep. That's like doing a rep at the gym. So you need to do lots of reps so that you're able to do that faster and faster. You know, learn from your mistakes. Don't you know, don't be ashamed. Everybody makes mistakes, and you know, the key part is how do you react to it. You know, like if I've definitely been on audits where later it was found out that something an audit I did, that there was something that was missed. I'm like investigating that. I'm thinking about like, how did I miss it? How can I not miss it in the future, etc. So learn from your mistakes. And upskilling, I don't know, I kind of maybe take this for granted, but I think like if you are, you know, if you should have minimum skills at both Hard Hat and Foundry to, as I said, be able to quickly come in and just modify tests and use tests. So I think there's a minimum level of at least Hard Hat and Foundry that you need. And if you don't have it, get it. Just go practice, practice, practice. So what else can we do? So like auditing is so much about like using your cognitive energy correctly. You know, as you guys probably know, we only have a limited amount. Like as for me, I'm at a good 6 hours of like focused heads down all day is usually about my limit. I can push harder. I can push, you know, harder, but like sustainably, I'm really only got about 6 hours of like extended focus in me. And so, you know, it's important to make good use of that. And by making good use of that, we can kind of, you know, optimize, you know, for step 2, as I said. So, yeah, you know, you got to, like for a while, I was also doing a lot of trying to do some auditing on nights during the week, and that just that I couldn't make that work. I couldn't, you know, I ended up just doing a lot more on the weekends. But obviously, your kind of general health, sleep, eating, all that is super important. And then here I got this thing: let go of your hyper opinionated, nitpicking inner demon. I mean, I used to be, I mean, I still kind of am, but as a developer, I was super opinionated. I'd always get in fights on Twitter about like stupid things like section headers or like NatSpec. And so that was a big that was a big thing I had to adapt to when I became an auditor. Is you gotta just let all of that go. Like, I remember even there might have been like some quiz. I think one of the first quiz. I bet you guys might still have it, but it's like there's all these little mistakes in it and like, you know, weird things. And I remember feeling like, oh, how can we audit this? The code is just so messy, you know. But like you have to. You can't like go through and change the code base when you're auditing just because it's not like, you know, written in the way that you wish it was. And so the quicker that you could just let that shit go, the better off you're gonna be. And I thought I thought I had kind of like gotten over that like pretty quickly early on, But oh man, recently I came across something and it was like triggering this in me a little bit. I don't know why did they do it this way, but you just got to let it go. You save that cognitive energy for doing good stuff. And yeah, for that matter, I say don't spend a lot of time, um, um, with gas optimization, especially in the early stages. I think that if you're an optimizer like I am, like it's very easy to get sucked into, optimizing all their code for them. But that is another waste of your cognitive energy. It's taking you away from finding critical bugs in their code base. So, um, like I would say, if any of you guys are not optimizers, you can use this kind of yAcademy fellowship to learn more about optimizing. But if you are an optimizer, don't even bother with any gas optimizations for the rest of the time here, because like you already know about that, and what you're here to do is develop other skills. So that is just my thing about gas optimizations. Okay, and so then the last thing I want to talk about, and I see that we're about, I think we're a little bit over on time. Oh no, we started at 9:30, right? Okay, cool. Right. Yeah, we started at 9:30, right? Okay, cool. We're good. We're good on time. Well, then in that case, let me take a break here. I went through a lot of stuff. We quickly talked about the report. We talked about like what we can do to kind of maximize your time in step two, which is to do a lot of audits, upskill, learn from your mistakes, and then yeah, really be very conscious of your cognitive energy, and yeah, just try to focus on the bigger picture. Like, okay, maybe it doesn't have it's not like the curly braces aren't in the place where you want them, but does it do what it's supposed to do? And being able, the sooner you come to grips with that, the better off you're going to be. For me, it was a bit of a transition. Um, yeah, any questions on that?
I have a question about something you said prior to that, which was learning from your mistakes. And something I started doing recently in Code Arena is studying up the reports and like just writing down what I missed. Do you have any other method, basically, do you have any recommendation to learn from better from mistakes?
No, I don't have any thing I could add to that, except for I think like doing what you just said collaboratively might make it stick more. So like, one good way to do it is typically you're going to be teamed up with like at least one other. Oh, you said you did it on Code for Arena, right? Because like on an
Yeah.
audit, you're typically going to have a teammate that you can like talk to and reflect on. Say, how did we miss that? For Code for Arena, like, yeah, going through the exercise on your own is great. But, I would even recommend, I'm sure you're making some friends here at, yAcademy, and I'm sure you're, just getting to know people in the security community. Why not just start a little message chain with one of your friends about it? Like I do that stuff all the time. I think when you are put in a position where you have to verbalize something, and explain it to someone else and have like a discussion that involves critical thinking, you tend to learn stuff a lot more. So that would be the only thing I would add, is try to find somebody to talk about it with.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, so I think this is, oh yeah, so this is a review page, and I also want to talk about teaming up. Okay, so this is supposed to just review how do we like optimize for step two. And the first one is doing lots of audits. And also just to clarify, like for an audit, I mean like what I described as a rep earlier. Like it could be a Code for Arena contest, it could be Immunify, it could be you just doing it on your own. Okay. But the rep is where you go from seeing a new code base that you've never seen before and to like deeply understanding that code base. Like in my mind, that's the rep I'm talking about. And then, yeah, once you kind of get better at that, you want to focus on your actual bug finding skills. But for newer people, I think like the hardest part is getting that practice in on understanding the code. Try to make your mistake only once, which I could say, like, if you triage if you go to that effort to look over the things that you've missed, yeah, I don't think I've ever, to my knowledge, I haven't missed anything twice. I probably have, but it hasn't come up yet. I don't know. But yeah, I would definitely make it it's definitely a thing to learn from your mistakes, because over time you're going to make many different mistakes, so that's like another advantage of like the C. Michelle type auditors, is not only have they seen so much code, not only have they seen so many bugs and vulnerabilities, but they've also made the mistakes. They've already made the mistakes, and so it's an important part of the process. Let go of your OCD about code style and gas optimizations, and then finally team up. Okay, so that's one thing I like to talk about. So I've audited with yAudit, it's called now, with Spearbit. I did an audit with them, and I've done code for Arena stuff in a team situation, and now at my current company, I've done a lot of auditing on a team, and I could say pretty confidently that I feel like teamwork is really underutilized across the board in our industry. I feel like most of the time, most audits are going to be the sum of each person on the team doing an individual audit. It's not always the case, and I'm sure you guys can tell me stories about how you had some great discussions in the chat about whatever audit you did. But it's just a generalization. I feel like there isn't a lot that I've seen that's done to encourage that, and I've really been making an effort to, like, on every audit I'm on, to facilitate more discussion early, and I think that I've been seeing some benefits of doing that. So I think that yAcademy is a perfect opportunity for you to develop these skills. And once you've developed them, you could bring them to any kind of audit or situation that you're in the future, okay? And the reason why yAcademy is such a great time to develop them is because, like, I mean, frankly, there's not a lot riding on it, right? Like, it's not like you're working for an auditing company and you're gonna, like, get fired if you don't do a good job. It's, like, it's not like you're taking time out of your day to do a code for Arena contest and time is money. Like, no, you're here to learn. And so I would really spend time focusing on things that take you out of your comfort zone and they're going to help you in the long term. And I think trying to team up on these audits is really a skill that not many people have, okay? And so let me give you an example of how you might team up, because we actually, in my block, we did a little bit of teaming up on one of the audits. So one of the ways you could do it is if there's multiple parts, like let's say there's like an AMM and there's like a vault contract and there's like a, I don't know, like some kind of administrative, record keeping contract. You could divide them up, right? You could say, okay, these two people are going to, research this, other people can research that. And then you can meet up and you can share what you've learned and just have a discussion. And then, like, remember how I mentioned several times about like the tracking the the threads to pull on? Well, like, what I would suggest and what we did was we kept that list kind of communally in the Discord. And so as we would think of things, we would add it to the list, and then people would take on these different threads and say, hey, I'm going to look at the reentrancy in the withdrawal function, or I'm going to look at whatever. So yeah, announce what issue you will investigate to eliminate. Yeah, that also prevents two different people from working on it. So I think if you try something like this, two things. One, I think it's going to work. It's going to really increase your understanding. And two, you're going to start to develop skills to, you know, facilitate and encourage teamwork on audits, which I think that we could all use more of. And then, yeah, I mean, everybody has different background here. Some people might be like a math whiz, or some people might have specific domain or industry experience. So if you do have some kind of specialized knowledge, yeah, please speak up and just kind of try to work together and share everything. Any questions on teamwork or like really what what I would love to see is, instead of an audit being the sum of, you know, the individual auditors doing a solo audit, I would like to see it being the synergy, you know, where like 1 + 1 is equal to more than 2, because, you know, some sort of synergy was created between, like, let's say there's only 2 people on the audit. Like, that is like the dream. But does anyone, does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions, or does anyone have any experiences, you know, maybe where they've seen teamwork successfully work successfully during an audit? All right. Well, we're getting toward the end. This is my last couple of slides. Another thing that I experienced during the yAcademy fellowship was like various emotions. I mean, I was definitely excited, but then also there was like a little bit of stress. You know, I mean, or like, let's say that your teammate finds a bit critical and you haven't been able to find anything, that, you know, you could have some feelings of anxiety. It's all normal, okay? And just expect that, so that it doesn't take you off, you know, it doesn't throw you off. But one thing to consider, and this is something that, like, this is one of the things I definitely wish somebody would have told me when I, you know, the first week like this, which is like, let's say that you do what we talked about before, which is we're going to split up the work, and one guy's going to do the AMM, the other guy's going to look at the proxies, right? Well, let's say that the guy looking at the AMM finds a bunch of stuff, and the guy looking at the proxies doesn't. So one thing to realize is that it's really a team win, getting those, finding those issues on the AMM. And, you know, the AMM guy has to thank the proxy guy, because thanks to the proxy guy, he was able to spend all of his time on the AMM and find these things. Whereas if both guys would have spent half the time on each, they might not have found anything. But because, you know, one person has put in the extra work on the proxy, it kind of allows for another person to look into the AMM. So keep that in mind as well, that like anytime you like put in some work reviewing something carefully and considering you know, potential vulnerabilities, writing up POCs, you're doing work towards the team that's valuable. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, who gets to claim credit for an individual issue isn't really, I think, that important as actually making the client aware of the issues. So, all right, I think we got my last slide here. So yeah, as I kind of start off by saying, and I've tried to say throughout, is, you know, take advantage of this opportunity. You know, like I said, if you're an optimizer, I don't think you should do any gas optimizations at all this next few weeks. Focus on other stuff. Like, yeah, if you're like me and you're like super opinionated code style guy, then don't submit any informationals, okay? Try to use your brain to do some new stuff, find some, you know, critical bugs or something. If you're like an experienced C4 warden, well, let me tell you some, first of all, congratulations. And second of all, whether you kind of realize or not, and to everyone to varying degrees, you're going to have some certain comfort zone that you developed over time as a warden on C4. Maybe you're like super good at finding data validation issues, and that's like your bread and butter, and you always just go through and do a sweep of, you know, data validation, and it always gets you at least, you know, a medium or two. Well, don't do any data validation issues at all during this whole time. at yAcademy. Okay, push yourself, look for new stuff, try new things, try different approaches. Yeah, that's what the next line says. If you're like an experienced auditor that's been on, some audits before, try new things. Try doing things that you didn't do on your audits, because, like I said earlier, like this is just such a great opportunity. There's no stress, right? And this is just an opportunity to be surrounded by, friendly, supportive people, and to try new things and learn. And yeah, let's just learn from each other and have fun. So yeah, now can just open it up to questions on the last part or to anything in general, any kind of general questions. Feel free to jump in. Did I just hear maybe I'll stop sharing, or no, I don't have to stop sharing. Where is oh, here it is. Let me just look down the list here. Oh yeah, I haven't seen any of these messages. Literally dream. Yes, yes, literally dream. I've had some good dreams about code. Critical code is ugly. The whole is more than the sum of the parts when discussing with the team. Yeah. What do you think about asking the developers question about the code directly? Yes, like first of all, I think that's one of the things I think that I noticed that on the audit that I did with yAcademy, or now yAudit, where yAudit really shines is like having a great kind of ongoing dialogue and conversation with the client. And I think like, yeah, that's great. You only have a limited amount of time. I mean, of course, you got to be wary of the cognitive bias, and like sometimes you'll get a client that isn't really good at explaining. Like I'll ask them something and they'll just like start telling me all these like reasons why their solution is so awesome, but they don't really tell me about their solution. Like that. There's one example I was thinking of. But I think in general, like increased communication with the developers is a good thing. What is this chat GPT icon? I don't know what you mean by that. Oh, on my computer, Zach Obrant shared some kind of like thing that can turn any, I guess, web app into an actual desktop app, and so I tried it, and yeah, it works. How do you deal with poorly documented code bases? It's hard. It slows down the whole process. The good news is that more and more clients are showing up with better and better documentation. But yeah, it's hard to deal with no documentation. In that case, I would recommend even more talks with, more interaction with the development team. Yeah, I mean, of course, there's different facets of documentation. You can have like external documentation, like a wiki website. You could have like white paper, PDFs. You could have, all the NatSpec and inline comments throughout the code. I mean, if you've got none of that, it's so hard. And so, like, if I literally had none of that, I would probably just be like on calls with the client, like like multiple times during the first week, just going over stuff, because it's just such a waste of the whole team's time to like make assumptions and think, oh, I think it works this way, and go through some iterations, spend a half a day or a day, and then realize, oh no, actually it doesn't work that way at all. So I think you know, I think it's important to communicate to clients that don't have documentation that that is a serious thing and it's going to slow down the audit. And I think it's also important in that situation to just, yeah, meet with the client, like record those calls you have with them, and like, now this is your documentation. I mean, the really good client, like when I say really good, I mean the clients with really good documentation, they're going to even show up with things like recorded videos walking you through like some of the user workflows, you know, fully built out wiki website. You know, now actually chat GPT, like GPT bots are becoming more and more of a thing. Like, you know, there's like chat PDF where you could put the PDF, you can submit a PDF and you can start asking questions about it. Like there's similar types of things you could do to create chatbots for your users to, you know, ask questions about the docs. But yeah, poorly documented code bases really suck from an auditor perspective. All right, well, I don't see any other questions on the thing here, and if nobody else has any, we can wrap this up.
You should scroll down. There's a couple more.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Maybe Chat GPT can help for documentation. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we released this thing called Slither Documentation, which is really good at going through code that doesn't have NatSpec and like adding NatSpec to it. And then in certain cases, I've also used GPT to help like summarize, you know, white papers or ask questions about white paper, like I mentioned. And then also depending on like the situation, but you can also use Chat GPT to kind of help with some wording on your final report. How to ask questions politely to developers. One of the things I've noticed is, I mean, everybody has ego, right? And like, one of the things I've noticed is like developers, just by nature, and you know, I was one of, you know, I am a developer at heart too, is like when you point something out as a problem or a question, it's just very natural to get very, to get kind of defensive. And to like instantly want to explain the reason why it's this way. So like, you know, why is this function missing a only owner, you know, modifier? Like, oh, well, in the old version, we had it working a different way, and then we did this, and you go on and on. It's like, you know, it's just a mistake. Just, you know, it's like a yes or no question, right? So like, just recognize that, you know, that developers are kind of coming from that perspective a lot of the time. And so I think formulating your questions where you can get to the actual facts you need quicker is helpful. I think that, you know, another natural thing is for auditors to assume that developers are dumb. That's just like a general sentiment, I think, that you see, you know, across the board. And I think that's also a kind of a useful attitude in some ways because, like, it kind of instills this, this what's the word I'm looking for? Controversial. I think that's the word I'm looking for. Attitude where you are more inclined to think that something contrarian. I don't think that's the word I'm looking for. But anyway, you're it's a mindset where you're more looking for things that are going wrong as opposed to thinking, oh, you know, I'm sure that the developers did a perfect job on everything. You know, you might have this like subconscious inclination to not follow up. Whereas if you had an attitude that, you know, these guys are screwing up, then you will follow up more. Adversarial, that was the word I was looking for. Yeah, just had a brain fart. It's been a long morning, actually. Yeah, adversarial. So I think like that is important, and I think like that kind of explains why there's that phenomenon I mentioned. Oh, here's a couple questions I missed. For the invariant fuzzing part, do you use Echidna and Foundry? Yeah, I mean, it depends on kind of what the client used. I think there's Echidna has Echidna can do a lot more with fuzzing, but if if Foundry was already set up. Well, it depends too, because Echidna actually takes solidity tests. So I've done both ways. Like I mean, I've done it where I just went ahead and um, actually I haven't really had it done like a fuzzing campaign and use Foundry. I usually will switch to Echidna. But in terms of just like running regular tests and POCs and playing around with things, if they're using Foundry, I'll just go ahead and use Foundry. So yeah, I think I tend to use Echidna. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you guys for listening to me.
Thank you, Tooligan.